what's all this about, this pollen bomb? Because I used to have quite bad hay fever as a kid, but I sort of grew out of it, I would say, sort of round about my teenage years. But for some reason this year I've had it a little bit worse than I've ever had it for a long time.
Yes, I've had a lot of people say that to me in clinic as well,
Right.
people coming in for extra treatments. Well, we know this weekend there's going to be a very high pollen count, according to the Met Office, and that's because of the weather conditions we've had in the last few months. We've basically had a very short spring, and as a result of that, we're having a lot of tree and grass pollen being dumped all at once this weekend, when we've also got nice sunny weather, which also encourages the pollen to come out as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, is it worse when it's hotter as well, or is that not necessarily true?
No, it is worse because of the way that trees and grasses pollinate, and also because we are out when it's sunny, as we should be. We should be out and about in the nice weather. We open our windows, we're in and out. We carry pollen on our clothes and hair back into our houses. So, yes, it's sort of combination of a lot of different factors.
And is there anything you can do? I mean, I often get told by people, oh, if you buy local honey from local bees, in whichever particular area you are, that can be helpful.
Yes, that can be helpful, because what you're doing is the allergen that your body recognises, which gives you hay fever, is also present in that honey, obviously, because it comes from flowers that have been pollinated. So it can help to have local honey. I would advise people to try lots of different things, and by that I mean that you can look at using medicines, which obviously your pharmacist can help advise you about, whether that's antihistamines or nose sprays, but also look at actually keeping the pollen away from you in various different ways. So things like an air purifier, making sure when you're asleep at night that you've got your bedroom window shut, remembering that if you're hanging your washing out in the garden, you're bringing it back in covered in pollen. Likewise, as I said, when you come in from a day out, your clothes and hair will also have pollen in them as well. So just being aware of methods to keep pollen away from you, not just using the medical treatments.
Okay. And so if, say, for example, you're bringing your washing, can you depollinate it somehow?
You can't really. So as much as I like the idea of hanging your washing out in the garden, if you are a hay fever sufferer, or someone in your family is, then you are better off to dry it in the house, unfortunately.
Oh, that's interesting, because that's not something I think many people would know. And what about the sort of the business of which part of you gets affected? Because my sister gets very bad hay fever, and she often gets, I mean, she takes a lot of antihistamine for it, but she would get it in her eyes, and you get very sort of swollen eyes, whereas I tend to get it kind of like a little tickle at the back of my throat, which is obviously quite difficult if you're speaking for a living.
Yes, it must be. I mean, that's just the spectrum of illness that we see with any illness, whether it's hay fever or COVID or anything else that we know about. There's always a spectrum, and there's different symptoms. So your eyes and your nose have a particular lining, which is what's affected by hay fever. So there isn't really any sort of rhyme or reason as to why your sister is affected in a different way from you. It would mean that maybe she needs different treatments. So, for example, using the eye drops are going to be what she needs to do, rather than necessarily a nasal spray, which would probably help your throat. Right.
So what's the sort of peak expectation of when it's at its worst in the coming few days then, do you know?
It's supposed to be Friday and the weekend for the pollen bomb. So recommend people using their medications from now.
Okay. Well, we'll get people getting their stuff ready and arranged. And is there any reason why you should use kind of more, I don't know, organic treatments than stuff you would buy sort of over the counter in a chemist?
No, not really. I mean, I would recommend that people think about medicines and also think about non-medical treatments, as I've said. So things like using a barrier cream like Vaseline around your nose, that stops the pollen coming in.
Okay.
People find wearing wraparound sunglasses is helpful for the same reason. It stops the pollen going into your eyes. Something like an air purifier keeps the pollen away within your home environment. So a combination of all of those things, but people certainly don't need to be afraid of using medicinal treatments as well, like antihistamines and nose sprays.
Okay. I've got a question here from somebody saying, is it worse because of No Mow May? This was where a lot of people decided not to mow their lawns to save the planet or something.
Well, I don't know really whether or not that affects the grass pollen season, and I hadn't heard of no mow May, so possibly that means that it wasn't a particularly
well, I guess
widely taken
you're
up
maybe not as
phenomenon.
middle class as I thought you were. I think it's one of those middle class things. First of all, you've got to have quite a big garden, and you've got to not mow it, and then write pieces about it in the papers. But I shall take advisement on that one. Thank you.